I think this was a really exciting afternoon for me. I learned a lot. And I actually would like to start maybe with all of you, but maybe first, I think everybody knows, pretty much everyone who's here, two new faces. Bart, I don't think he really needs an introduction to this audience. Who doesn't know Bart? There you go.
Okay.
So please, Stefan.
So I'm Stefan Joris, I'm the CEO of the Belgian Cystic Fibrosis Association. And I'm also chairman of RADIORG, the Rare Diseases Organization, which is the Alliance Association for all patient associations around rare diseases in general.
So we thought that it was important that at the end of the day we also included the patients here, because that's where we're here for, I think, to make everything better towards patients at the end of the day. But lessons learned. We heard a lot of challenges, but I think there's also quite some nice things that came out of the project of ATHENA. And Frank, I would like to start with you. From your perspective as a doctor, what are the things that you've learned? And I know not so much just challenges. We're gonna dive into some of the challenges as well. But what comes out for you from this project that you've learned?
Well, one of the first or the most important things I was amazed to see is the level of expertise and knowledge that is surrounding us. So I was aware of data, I was aware of opportunities, but I'm still amazed today also to listen what are the opportunities that we have. Second lesson that I also was aware of already was that we need to be humble, and they say in Dutch, you have to clean before your own front door. So as clinicians, we have to improve our data collection. We are doing initiatives, but also there, we should blame ourselves. It goes slowly. We have to change our behavior. No one likes administration, but doing correct data collection is part of the job. And I think we also need to focus on initiatives at the bottom level. So clinicians need to do better registration in order to make the data collection, extraction, and analysis better. So that's maybe one of my lessons.
Maybe Yves, could you elaborate on that or pick up on that?
Yeah, so for me, the data heterogeneity, which I find, a major annoyance as a machine learning person, I think it's also a huge opportunity. I mean, when we look in research, well, we see a lot of papers where conclusions are drawn from the data that is available somewhere. And then there is a claim that, well, this biomarker is an indicator for this or that. And there is not always a lack of reproduction of those results. So I think that by collecting data more broadly, we will actually weed out the poor results, and it will be very frustrating because maybe the output will look smaller, but it will be of actually higher quality. So I think there is a very significant opportunity to be faced with the reality of the data. Even if it's a bit more frustrating, it will lead us to better conclusions.
Roel, is this something you can confirm, or?
I can confirm, I think, what both speakers have said. So something that I've learned is that there is actually no money to be had for hospitals to pay people to actually help clean data and maintain it and manage it. Something that I noted in the last talk about our Danish colleague, where they mentioned there is actually support for that. But that's not research, that's not engineering, you cannot have a company with that, and so that is very hard to fund. And yet, and that was the same here, that remains a very heavy exercise to do. And we saw that as well. So that's something that I learned, that it is indeed very hard to do, even if doctors would want to do this, right? So it makes it double hard. There is like the initial entering of the data, but there would potentially be even more work in than actually also continue to maintain it. So, but I can confirm that there is some. I think we also learned. I think it was mentioned a couple of times. It's a marathon. So you need to be persistent. It goes extremely slow. And that is something that I hope will become faster. And so we heard there may be new legal or ethical things popping up. But still, I hope that in that whole process there is a more common shared understanding from technical side to that side, but also I hope vice versa.
No. Bart?
Yeah, I think we've all learned a lot. I think we have grown a little bit older, wiser.
More gray hair?
Well, I would be happy with more hair, but okay. But what I think we've also learned is that there needs to be a very clear benefit identified. And I think that's maybe an area where we still need to jointly look at, okay, what is the immediate benefit that goes back to treating physicians in the first place? Because that's where the benefits for the patients will also start. So, and I think maybe one of the challenges why there is not the really good data is because the return is not so clear. So looking at improving the return for the physicians and thus the patients, if we can get that right, then I think the benefit that comes for life sciences research companies like ours is a derivative of that. So that's one observation. The second observation is that some of the dashboards, and I think most of the clinicians involved and most of the hospitals involved work already with some dashboards, but they typically take some snapshots. So it's a snapshot in time. And that represents relatively a good picture at that moment in time. But obviously, everything in healthcare is longitudinal. And the challenge was tremendously increased when we started to look at longitudinal trajectories and time to events. And yet it's there that we are going to gain the biggest benefits and the deepest insight. So yeah, we've made a nice step. There's still a lot of a long road to go.
And Ingrid, the strength of the project, was it that I've heard this a few times today, we're not going to solve all the problems, but focusing into a specific area, specific disease areas. Was that a strength?
Well, at least by taking 2 disease areas as use cases, it helped to make things more practical. Because, yeah, you may not forget, we're bringing here together a lot of disciplines. Sometimes, for some people, very abstract things. Yeah, how it could fit together. Yeah, that was also a major thing to do. And bringing different languages, disciplines together, solving a lot of complexities. Yeah, that's another order of problem solving. And yeah, that I think was a major achievement in exchanging, learning from each other, taking practical cases to bring it back to something understandable for many. And then in each of our disciplines, trying to find solutions. But yeah, the exchange on cases helped a lot in that sense.
Yeah. Before we dive in some of the challenges, Stefan, you as a representative of a patient organization, a chronic disease area, how does this day and the different speakers inspired you, or what are your conclusions?
I would say both ways. I think we're seeing that Belgium has, for the last couple of years, been a bit behind compared to other European countries in collecting data, gathering data, and managing and sharing those data. And I'm seeing that this is being rapidly filled in by ever-growing expertise. So I think there was a high level of presentations of studies. But I've been waiting until the last one, and I'm still a bit disappointed. Because what I saw was that a lot of discussions were going around GDPR, and I think as Magali pointed out, we're trying to use the regulations to check the box of GDPR, and everybody's kind of trying to avoid to have to talk to the patient. And I haven't seen so far not in an advisory board of any project, not in a use case, a clear involvement and engagement with that patient. We're not only trying about clinical trials whenever we have to talk to patients or daily treatments or stuff. It has been mentioned also this problem of trust, and I think the problem of trust is both ways. And you have to be honest, it's also at the side of the patient. But we're not going to solve that trust by trying to avoid talking to the patient. Why? And I think if we're looking at disease-specific use cases, patients have a great deal of suggestions to make on what kind of data to start collecting. My field of expertise is cystic fibrosis. I know that we've had quite some fights and campaigns around getting reimbursement of certain new modulated therapies in the past years, because we stressed on a number of biomarkers and things that government and buyers did not take into account in decisions on reimbursement. And so those data were not gathered, were not collected in a structured way. So if there's one incentive or thing that I could, an advice could say, start talking to the patients. They don't bite. Engage them, involve them in your projects. They do have things to put on the table that are valuable for any health project.
Does any of you want to comment or?
Of course. I mean,
okay, of course.
We're not going to disagree with that. And yes, I think that we do need to involve patients much more actively and proactively. And I think it's happening, at least I'm talking now from a pharmaceutical company's perspective. I think that is happening a lot more than it used to be 5 to 10 years ago. But it should increase. And as an element under the umbrella of Project ATHENA, we also had, okay, it was a relatively small roundtable with representatives from various disease areas. And it was really around, okay, their feelings on reuse of data. And I must say that there was a roaring agreement amongst the various participants, and you were there, Stefan. So if I'm lying, you can contradict me. But there was roaring agreement amongst the patients and the patient representatives about reusing data. Yeah, data should be reused, and yes, we want to see transparency. We want to know what the data has been reused for. But no, we don't need to know all of the details, but we would be interested in knowing where we can find the details if we want them. So I mean, that was a unisono alignment coming back from the patients, but yeah, we still need to involve them.
Yeah, and what I also heard, in fact, is that patients could also even check quality of data. Because sometimes in certain diseases, it's not always the case, of course, but in certain diseases, they know their data better than the doctor, if this is a sound data point and can be logic or not, or if it's errors. So in that sense, patients could also take a role as control for the quality of the data.
Yeah. One of the speakers, I think it was Michel van Spijbroek, he said, well, we don't actually have a technical problem. So I was kind of okay. Okay, that was a safe. So I'm kind of okay. What are we doing then? Is it? I heard Frank starting his talk with, we weren't waiting, but we were kind of pushed back through regulations, over-regulating. Is that it? Or we don't have enough data? So how can we solve all these?
It's inventing a new model. It's data-driven medicine. It's a new legal model. It's a new way how we use data. So it's on multiple levels finding a new model or new models for the challenges we have. That's the main difficulty, I think.
And then, Frank, go ahead.
I think we might agree that there exist technical solutions in the world, or even in Flanders, for all the problems that we have encountered. The does not mean that they are rolled out and that we can readily use them. So yes, theoretically we can solve the problem that we have encountered, but as a clinician, I still feel the lack of platforms to use in my clinics. I think we have made great steps forward empowering patients. They have access electronic to their own patient files. They have access to several aspects. We talk more to them than my ancestors. But they do not have access to aggregated data, and nor do we always. And if we have access to aggregated data, it's often because we made our own initiatives. This does not come from up to down, but bottom up.
And I think there's still some fundamental discussions to be held, and Griet mentioned it as well. European Health Data Space talks about data ownership by the patient. Well, let's start by defining ownership. What is ownership and what does it exactly mean? And so there has to be a discussion on the collaboration. How are we going to manage the data? And I'm explicitly saying we, but are we going through in the direction of data pods, whether that be solid or anything else, the federated data governance that you adhere? But there's still some major discussions that should be resolved before we really can make some progress in implementing that kind of data model. Who has access to what, in what case? I mean, it's a simple, I get the idea of the opt-out as being a practical one. It's about feasibility. But there's, on the other side, kind of a mistrust in it. And there is one of the examples I always use there's a website, it's a biobank, Belgian biobank, Soya Genome, on genomics for Marfan syndrome. And they build a module of dynamic consent. And by the way, when the Dutch guy, I forgot his name, said we should change, that is not informed consent, it's consent. It does not mean that we don't have to inform the patient anymore. He just has to give his consent. No. But they build a module in dynamic consent where you start a conversation, but technologically easy working on, and I think the best way to convert the patient and in convincing them to share their data is explain what you are trying to do. And they will help because studies really demonstrate this patient altruism in wanting, especially obviously patients with chronic or rare diseases are really willing to share their data.
Yeah, but if from our keynote speaker, the OSCAR platform, 85% is willing to share data, and then I think that's the opt-out. He mentioned the opt-out if you want to go for secondary use. It seems like a...
but there are a lot of differences in secondary use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your initial question was whether this is a technology challenge. And someone very famous, Johan van der Leij, actually, in one of the European projects once said about something like this. It is a complex socio-technical construct. So both aspects are important. So the social component is important, and that means the people side of things with governance and involvement and contribution, but also a technical challenge. I mean, I think those two are in balance, but it's true that the main, well, hurdles and challenges are maybe with the social part of it. With regards to data ownership and dynamic consent, yeah, I'm sure you're right, Stefan, with a number of maybe rare diseases or diseases where patients are very involved and where you have strong patient organizations. I'm not so sure about the broad, big disease areas and even getting to what is normal. What does normal look like? So it's not black or white. I think there are gray shades of gray that make this discussion a little bit more difficult.
I think I get the point, but neither one of the parties is really there today. Are patients ready to engage in everything? No. Are scientists ready to engage patients in every project? No. But we should enlarge patients to citizens. And maybe in a I don't know what, short-term or long-term future, people will be used to having, let's say, a kind of a constant discussion with government bodies on various aspects of their lives. And one of them will be, but are we there today? I agree with you, we're not.
It's maybe
Both
even more
parties are
challenging
not.
for privacy if
Yes.
the more discussions and the
Definitely.
more debates and the more approvals
yeah.
you give.
Yeah.
And don't forget dynamic consent means for every research question. So, I mean, is everyone able to evaluate the research question as such? Is it a bona fide question coming from a bona fide party? That's one. And second, I mean, it means reiteration of consent. So I'm not sure how long people will be happy with answering these questions.
Yeah, indeed.
Thank you.
There is many, but it remains a complex thing. And so to come back to Michelle's question, I want to answer it 3 times with 3 different hats. Yes, go for it. So as a researcher, I would say we're not done yet. There is still a lot of work to be done. We heard about some of the newer technologies about privacy-preserving ML. You can extend this, you can do multi-party computation. Yes. What can you express with that? What can you not express with that? So from a technical way, for example, this consent, how would you do this? Technically, practically? So as a researcher, I would say I don't agree with Michelle. We're not there yet. There's lots of things to do. As somebody from IMEC, then that's a different question. There I would say lots of it is there yet. I agree with Michelle. The question is, if you look around, you have all these techniques. They are described. There is nice research about that. Then the question is, how do you bring that innovation to a more practical solution? And then suddenly you have to deal with very practical stuff. How much does it cost? Right? Is the compute available to do it at scale? Is there enough storage? Where will you store it? Are the tools there? Is the data incomplete? And how do we deal with it if it's not complete? Because we cannot magically invent it. Part of it can become research questions, part can become practical things. So there I would say also there is a lot of work to be done still, even though technically a lot is available. And then I can put on my hat as an end user, a patient. And as a patient, I'm typically very sad because there I know many of the things that are available. I know some of the things we're working on. And if I then go with family to an oncologist or my wife who has diabetes, then actually a lot is not available in practice yet. Right? So clearly there we have a lot of work to do, and there I would be happy with even the very small things, the low-hanging fruit. And I agree with what you were saying. We all know it should be there, but it isn't. And so there's a lot of, I think, political things to be solved, very practical things, integration of databases, and indeed, I mean, all the things that you also mentioned that you have as a patient group for these diseases, but I think it's true for most of it. Even my doctor typically does not have all the information available, right? Yeah. So what do we expect? And then we can talk very nice about bringing all of this together, but there at the practical level, I certainly agree with Michelle. There is a lot of things there that we cannot put in practice yet.
What we see as with Medvia is that some of our companies that need data, second use, they have digital applications, devices. They start saying, okay, we've had it with Europe, we've had it with Belgium, we're going to go to the United States and bring our products on the market there. There's too much overregulation. The investors are not ready to wait until everything is solved. And I think they kind of come from someone mentioned that question, that what is the harm? I don't know if that lady's still here, but what is the harm that we're actually trying to protect? And from my perspective, I didn't get a good answer to that, and I was hoping maybe some of you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, I can address that. Okay, to give an example, all babies get a blood test at birth to detect treatable rare genetic disorders. That's fantastic. What about that data? Because before that it's just a couple tests, but now we're going to sequence all that. What about that data being used by the police to solve crimes? And what are the implications of that? That sounds great. We're going to catch criminals just by having the blood samples of all the children. But what does that mean that at some point, a parent will decide that their child should not be tested because they could get caught based on that sample? And this is not far-fetched. There is a case like that in the US. There is another case. It's not exactly the same, but you can see the link. A woman who was arrested for burglary based on DNA test from a rape kit. So if rape victims are afraid to actually go to the clinic because they could get caught for something else, in what world are we living? So the harms may not be, that frequent, but we have to realize that first, they can exist. There are scenarios that are not science fiction or far-fetched scenarios. They're realities. I mean, what about, countries where the protection of individual freedoms is not the same? What about actually a country, even in Europe, deciding that people from some ancestry are, socially problematic, and we're going to trace that through their DNA? What about the difference between miscarriage and abortion in the United States? So could you end up in prison based on biological samples from a miscarriage because a prosecutor has decided that actually this was an abortion? So claiming that there is no scenarios of harm, I think it's wrong. Of course, most of us will intend to do really good things, but for example, interference between the police and clinical care should not be possible. We should say biomedical and research data should not be accessible to law enforcement. That would create extra trust also in the population, because when people are going to realize that their data is at risk, then they will come back and say, okay, what have you guys been doing with my data? Also, what people consent to, it's a complicated construct, because when you ask people, do you consent to research, they will say very often yes. But then the question is, what did they just consent to? When, this was in the newspaper last week, UK Biobank gives patient-level data to insurance industry-related companies. Well, there are questions there. There are questions. And when you ask the UK Biobank, their answers about data anonymizations are like, I get an epileptic fit out of their answers. I mean, it's really problematic. And so, also what is the power balance that you create with the control of this complex data? Will some people get very rich and will no benefits flow back? Or will we actually have a very live economy and then everybody will benefit? I mean, these are two different scenarios where we have to be really careful, because the difference between those two are just two paths that diverge slowly and then get to different places.
Building on that, how can we speed up still the process? Because we've seen the talks of both the lawyers. There's still lots of things that are coming towards us, also Europe. How can we, from each of your position, help that come about, or I don't know what the solutions could be, but how can we push that forward? I think that was also the initial idea behind ATHENA. So what the learnings there? What are the next steps? How can we bring this forward?
I think we really have to do it and must do it, because if we're not doing it here, other regions like US, even Far East, that are more easygoing with regulations, just try things, they will be miles ahead of us. We are here in Europe a very strong knowledge economy, but that means also we have to be flexible enough, take choices, like you said, what we can do and what not. But we really have to do something and move forward,
because
and not just.
For now, this is hindering innovation.
Absolutely.
This is where is this a stand? Could we say it's a a standstill that's hindering innovation.
Yeah, when we started the project, we thought it was easy. I said, you just do it.
We were young and inexperienced.
I would say easier.
Yeah,
We didn't think easy, but
Yeah.
easier.
But I think Belgium, Flanders is still an incredible hotbed of research and innovation. But we see that we are really, really good at early phases of discovery, really the deep biological discovery. That's where we are really strong. Biotech is really strong. Where I think the risk sits is that in the later phases, where we need broader sets of data, you heard Truls about external control arms, about using real-world data as a source for site selection and patient enrollment. So I think that's where we are risking to lose ground, because we do have, actually together with Denmark, we are leading with regards to numbers of clinical trials. But when I listen to Denmark, okay, it's not all solved neither, but they are ahead of us at this point in time. So while not all is dark and gloomy neither, if we now look back 4 or 5 years, and I think there are many people in the room here that are actually working in hospitals on data and that are building capabilities within all of the hospitals, academic as well as peripheral. And I think we need to find ways of stimulating those people, stimulating those networks that are emerging networks. We need to find ways of stimulating that. And so that's the bottom-up approach. And then we have to continue to work also on influencing policymakers, influencing the funding schemas. So that's the top-down approach. And I think we need to continue to do those two things.
Yeah, because I heard from something I picked up from the Spanish keynote speaker who mentioned that because it always, Spain, Portugal maybe also, they always come across to me that they have lots of data available.
They do.
But then I picked up, and maybe that's the reason or not, so you're the experts, that they, before being reimbursed, before getting money, they have to put it in. It has to be coded. This is different in Belgium, right?
Well, except for the cancer registry. That's also mandatory data registration that has to be done.
For which I hear that it's not going that well, but maybe I'm wrong.
No.
Okay.
No, I think it's a good building block
Okay.
that we could further extend. Also, we see now the first steps into outcomes-based reimbursement. There are mandatory data registration that has to be done. So,
But we have to be careful that we're not creating a secondary line of registration. So, and I think, Frank, you have more than work enough to also do secondary or even tertiary registration of certain data. So
Collaboration is key there.
That's one, but also we should have the principle of registering things once and reusing it. And I think that's what you start to see emerging in the various hospitals where local infrastructures are being developed, are being built. I think that the data capabilities call from the FOD recently is a step in the right direction in indeed stimulating this. I hope that we also keep that coordinated, that we are not building 3 tunnels of fire under this problem, but that we have one efficient tunnel. So I'm not that negative,
but
honestly.
No, but in fact, during COVID, we've done it. We've done a lot of data registration that we have used to decide who to vaccinate, how to organize things. So we have been doing it. So this is a good starting point to further broadening to more applications.
Shortly, I think we need to show benefit. And there, if once you're able to show benefit, then there will be much more buy-in and resources that become available, and that become available at all levels. That means from legislation to practical to small companies to, and that means benefit for me for A, patients, and B, doctors, because they are the users in the end.
Which is obviously more easy in a lethal, short-lasting disease than in a long trajectory, as the disease we were talking about today. So it's much harder to prove benefit.
And it also means if it is benefit for machine learning, I sometimes still get the question, okay, then first show it here on this very limited data of 10 patients with 4 data points, and if you can show benefit there, then we'll invest and make this more. Now that would be the same as training your natural language model on like 4 pieces and then expect ChatGPT. You will not get that. And so that means that we need to think about what to show, for what data is available, make sure that there maybe we can, in a limited setting, controlled, make sure that the legislation there is okay, that we can do experiments and show benefits, and then from there see, okay, now what needs to be done. So.
But I still see there's still a mental shift to be done as well. There was one project which was in collaboration with, if I'm not mistaken, Ghent, Leuven and Liège. And then my first question was, where are the other 4? And in CF, we work with 7 reference centers, right? Because centers, which are the university centers. They are competitors. They stay competitors. They even say so. Not in the meetings. They just say to me personally. But we still see that as we have a CF registry since 1999. They have their software to fill that, to feed the registry that goes to European registry and all that. They all have their own system. Mm-hmm. They would not know, and we've invested as an association, we were ready to invest in one standard so that it would save a lot of time and effort every year to feed that database. Nobody wants to. They still want to work with their own IT.
Well, they want to, but it should be their standard.
Yeah, well, yes, exactly. We'll build it for you, no problem, we'll build that. But if 7 people say we'll build it, that's a problem. And the same goes for the registry itself. Registry was founded by the association in 1999, and in 2005 was taken over by what is now known as Cienzano. And we've started last year a data collection on quality of life data. And our first idea was, well, we've kind of joined that to the registry, which makes the most sense, because the first use is obviously primary use, so the treating physician. And the answer of Cienzano was, well, glad to do so, but we're not allowed to share data. I was like, wait a minute, are we building silos just for the sport of getting that filled with data and then not share it? So we had to set up our own RedCap server and all the rest of it, but it was like, wait a minute, this is not what it's meant for.
Okay. Thank you very much to this panel.
Thank you.